Hello, everybody. This is Global Warming Skeptic, and this is the Young Turks is Exposed, episode number 12. This topic, just a sad, gross misunderstanding of the war on drugs by the Young Turks, not understanding the issue at all. Now, before we get into the meat and potatoes of their position, let me give you my position just to make sure you have context of where I'm coming from. I am for full private drug legalization in drug commerce. I believe that within the privacy of their own homes, anybody should be able to use any substance so long as that substance does not cause them to be a danger to others. So, and when I say I am for legalization, note that my position on this would be more further to the left, or at least more to the extreme than the left wing. I don't believe in taxing it. I don't believe in regulating it. Just let people use it. Let people have the freedom to use it. The government does not need their fingers on it. Now, just because the base of my position agrees with the Young Turks, it does not give them a pass to tell lies, distort, and spread just plain ignorance and not know what they're talking about when it comes to the war on drugs. So, with that, we're going to hear what they have to say.
Is all of these laws got passed that were tough on crime, right? Tough on drug related crime. And so in 1984, things got really, really bad. So let me give you some examples. There was the Sentencing Reform Act that happened in 1984, and it basically stated that those caught with drugs needed to have harsher sentences tied to their crimes. Okay, so they would get convicted and their sentences were ridiculous. Then there was the Anti Drug Abuse Act, which happened in 1986, 2 years later, and that basically required judges to give drug offenders mandatory minimums. So all of a sudden, you see this prison population swelling up. And then for profit prisons around 1984 again decided, hey, you know what? There's some money to make. Why don't we build our institutions, get these contracts signed by all these different states, and then we can just house all of these nonviolent drug offenders? It's awesome.
First of all, it's awesome. Really? Is that your nuance, Anna Kasparian? You guys are supposed to be the left, the sophisticated party. And, quote, it's awesome? No. I'm going to give you two facts that led to the increase in the war on drugs. Now, first of all, it's important to note that the war on drugs was started in 1970 by this man, Richard Nixon. You could listen to his speech right here while he was president. He is the one that gave the war on drugs speech, and this is what he was addressing. From 1960 and through most of the 1990s, homicide rates exploded. And this was a panic because this was linked to use of things such as LSD, and in the 1980s, the rise of crack cocaine. And everybody thought it was reasonable that the war on drugs made sense. And in fact, if you listen to campaigns from the 1980s, it was pretty clear that drugs was bad. I lived in this world, by the way, and drug use was not pretty. There wasn't the treatment that exists now. You know, drug users now have it a lot better than drug users back then did. And that was why things were so tough back then. It wasn't because, oh, it's awesome, let's house prisoners. No. The for profit prisons were backed by more efficient housing of prisoners. There was a lot more prisoners, and fueled by this. The homicide rate and other crimes had exploded during this time period. So, if you want to get into the real issue, let's be honest with your viewers. Now let's continue. See what other garbage they're going to spew out.
So you live in a bubble where you think that things have always been the way that they are, but that's not true. Even in 1980, there was only 5,000 people, as Anna just told you, that were in prison for drug-related offenses, federal prison. Now there's 95,000, right? So what are we doing here? Those are At a
Just as a note, most people go to state prisons for drug related offenses, not federal prisons. I just figured I'd let you know that.
minimum, an extra 90,000 people that are in prison only because we invented a war on drugs that have no business being in prison. Now, some of those guys might have committed other crimes, right? But it wouldn't be at this number because we know because other crime rates are actually declining. So we invented this problem, foisted it upon ourselves, and we now bow our heads and accept that certain percentage of our citizens, usually minorities, and I've had a Baltimore cop after Baltimore cop come in here and say, we don't do it to white people. Even if we're patrolling white neighborhoods, we'll go into black neighborhoods to arrest people for drugs.
Cop after cop after cop. The Young Turks has constantly stated this, and yet not once have they produced cop after cop after cop come into the Young Turks and tell them, quote, they do not do this to white people. That is not true. There are lots of white people that get prosecuted as well. In fact, even more than blacks. Now, it's not a fair comparison because there's more whites than blacks, but to say they don't do this to white people and it's mostly minorities, and the fact that you try to use a false cause fallacy to relate this to racism is nonsense. If you're going to compare numbers, Jank, you're going to have to find the smoking gun. Correlation does not imply causation. Just because more minorities are prosecuted for something does not mean that the reason they are prosecuted is purely because of the color of their skin. Let's move on.
Right? And we know white people do drugs at the same rate, but they don't get arrested at the same
How do you know that they do it at the same rate?
rate, right? So it's mainly people of color that we lock up and take away their freedom. Gee, I wonder if we've done that in this country before.
And for anyone watching this who might think, well, I don't do drugs and I don't really care about anyone other than myself, well, your taxpayer money is going toward this very perverse so-called justice system. So from 1980 to 2013, federal prison spending increased 595%, from 970 million to more than 6.7 billion dollars. And also, prison spending now represents one of every $4 spent by the U.S. Justice Department.
So that's a crying shame, and that's an extra $6 billion or so out of our pocket. That's an extra $6 billion or so into someone else's pocket,
Yes.
and that's why we have the problem in the first place. All problems lead back to money in politics, right?
So they're going to do their little Wolfpack plug there. We're not even going to let them advertise that. So I was thinking there'd be a little bit more there, but there's not. There's never substance with these guys. Although, strangely, generally, I agree with their position, but their justification is just idiotic. Once again, they try to falsely link things to racism that don't belong linked to racism. And if there are racial components, you have to look at your cities for the racial components. New York City, Chicago, and Los Angeles, the most racist cities in the country. So, if you're going to do an investigation, investigate yourselves and investigate why minorities are disproportionately affected by gangs, drugs, and murder. Thanks for watching. God bless.